Thanks for coming to the Davos experience in Tokyo, and tell us a little bit about Tech in Asia and what you do.
Sure, thanks for having me. As you know, my name's David Corbin, and I'm the country manager for Japan at Tech in Asia. TIA is a Singaporean company, and we act as a platform for startups offering media, events, as well as job services.
Job services, what exactly do you do?
We have a jobs platform, so any startup who's looking for a new teammate can list on our website, and we're widely read by the startup community across Asia, so you can hire in Singapore, Indonesia, really just across the region.
I see. We often hear that the startups and entrepreneurs and so forth is rather less active here in Japan.
Right.
Do you find that?
I think in terms of pure numbers, maybe there's fewer, but in terms of the success of the companies, I think Japan's a very successful startup ecosystem.
Is that right?
So you see a lot of companies that will get into hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, in value, and they'll exit via IPO or acquisition. And so that's sort of consistency. So Japan's been doing that for over 10 years.
Oh, I see.
And so the history and the consistency, I think, is really, really strong in Japan, even if some of the pure funding numbers aren't quite as large as the United States.
So, compared with Asia, what about the status of Japan?
Sure. So Japan, I'd still say it is ranked favorably. Of course, China is the larger market and has more startups and more funding. But then if you look, and also India as well, very, very active. When you get into Southeast Asia, the funding sizes are maybe a little bit smaller. And so similar to Japan, like Japan has two companies right now that are officially over $1 billion in value. There's a couple others that are unofficially that large. And you see similar statistics for, say, in Indonesia or even for Singapore. So I think Japan ranks favorably. And then the challenge going forward is how do you keep on innovating? So Japan has really good technical ability. So how do you build on top of that and try and create something that can really capture a market share that's worldwide as opposed to just inside Japan?
Right. You mentioned that there are two companies.
Yeah.
Which are
So
who are they?
one is called Mercari. It's a consumer-to-consumer used goods application. So they're going to have an IPO at the end of this month, I believe. The other one is called Preferred Networks. So this is a technology-driven company that specializes in natural language processing, and they provide software services to a variety of companies, both in Japan and internationally.
I see. When you say, I was a little bit surprised that in Japan it's quite consistent.
Yeah.
And how come? I think we have this notion of perception that Japan is rather weak in terms of the ecosystem and startups.
Right.
And
I think
why do you think that's the case?
I think it's because we're looking at the funding numbers. So, for instance, Japan had around $2 billion in funding last year.
Yes.
And you're looking at, say, America or China, which are many times that number. So you think, well, everything's happening there. But it's not necessarily the size of the funding. It's is this an environment where you can start a company and nurture it to maturity, and can that happen consistently? And so on that metric, Japan is pretty solid.
I see.
And it wasn't always that way. Of course, it used to be extremely difficult to start a company. You need to have all types of capital requirements, and these sorts of things are also getting easier. So in Fukuoka, Osaka, and I think Tokyo as well, they have special economic zones that make it a little bit easier to start a company, or even as an outsider to get a entrepreneur visa and try and make a business here in Japan. So the ease of starting a business is getting better, which means I think more people have the opportunity. I think if you look back, say 20 years ago, you had much fewer people who could start a company.
Right.
So like the first tech giants, Rakuten, DNA, these were done by very few people.
Yes.
And they were all already very successful people.
Right.
And now I think you have a generation where you're coming out of college. Like Preferred Networks, that was started by graduate students. They met together doing a hackathon. They won it, and they realized, wait a second, maybe we can just build a company ourselves. And that was how that started.
I see.
So you see, I think, a greater opportunity for more people to enter, and that's speaking to the perception issue you were talking about earlier.
I see. Okay. So what do you think? Well, you are a country manager for
Yeah.
Japan. So what are the biggest issues or biggest headaches for you?
Just as a country manager,
Yes.
yeah, I would say how to make sure I'm generating the right value. So we're a Singaporean company. We came from Southeast Asia.
Right.
So the way that maybe we generate value for customers there to make sure that we can still keep the core of the company the same, but maybe optimize for Japanese audience. For instance, in Japan, we say that we're a startup, a platform for startups, and so normally, say in Southeast Asia, people want us to connect them with their local ecosystem. So the Indonesia big companies want to meet the Indonesian startups. Now in Japan, we actually have to have two rules because we have to, one, help companies like a Fujitsu or a Microsoft connect with the local ecosystem. We also need to help other companies connect with ecosystems outside of Japan. And so that's something that's kind of different. And so it means being kind of careful what your client really needs. Because if you say, yeah, I'll introduce you to a bunch of Japanese startups, they might say, well, we already know them. We want you to introduce India.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that sort of, I think customization is a bit different in Japan compared to our other markets.
I see. So are you, judging from what you mentioned, like Fujitsu and all that, are your clients, I mean, I don't know whether you call it clients or not,
Yeah.
big companies here, or are you more sort of geared toward the startups?
Yes, that's a great point. In terms of the main business model, it's working with large companies as clients.
I see.
So a Fujitsu, a Microsoft, a Mitsubishi, UFG, those are all kind of core clients. And then in terms of the users who we want to support as well, definitely the startups.
I see.
Because the value creation comes from the startup community. Every major company, every venture capitalist is looking for the founder, looking for the small startup that's going to become something huge. So our overall platform is geared to helping those folks. So like when we do an event, it's about how can we help them get access to venture capitalists? How can we help them get access to certain skill sets or certain mentors? That's the focus of our activities, and we're very lucky that a lot of large companies want to help us do that.
At one point, I don't know, this could be sort of a myth again, but the Japanese large companies are not that interested in getting to know the startups.
Yeah.
Is that still the case?
I
And
feel
particularly so in the local market. I mean, they may be looking at the Silicon Valley or China or that, but not really here.
Yeah, I think that's kind of changed. So everyone's very interested in finding a new idea. And the level of the startups, I think, is getting better and better these days. So for instance, you're seeing something like Preferred Networks, that started, 5 or 6 years ago?
I see.
And now they have a lot of large companies as clients. And probably the sooner that you met them, the better your rate was. So there's a certain incentive to try and find companies that you can be a good partner with, that you can maybe build something together with. And so that sort of mindset, I think, is becoming more common here.
I see.
And there is an incentive to engage. So one way you can measure this is by actually the number of events. So events need sponsors. And since we've entered the country, we've seen a pretty big increase in the number of large-scale events.
I see.
The only way that you could be supporting all of these large-scale events is if there's more corporate sponsorship that's saying, we want to get involved in the startup community.
I see.
So the barrier to entry, the way that's lowered, has actually been really fascinating because people are realizing that maybe when I meet you today, you're not as large or as capable as a company that we can work with. But by meeting you today, when you're ready tomorrow, I'm in a position to work with you, as opposed because every startup remembers who was there with them
Right.
before they were
Right,
there.
right.
Because it's just like friendship.
Yeah.
Like before you became famous or whatever, you remember who was your good friend, who was giving you advice.
Right.
For me as well, everyone who was helping us out from the very beginning, I really am super appreciative to them, so I
Right.
want to keep supporting them as much as possible.
Uh-huh.
And for a corporate coming in, they need to make those relationships early.
I see.
Yeah.
What about, do they have the eye or capability to sort of identify them?
So that's
Yeah.
that's their big challenge. And so you see a lot of different companies hiring like a startup evangelist, or creating demo days, or creating certain incentive programs
Right.
that help startups understand, oh, this is a place that I should try and work with. Large corporations which open up their API, like this is something that Mitsubishi did. They opened up their API and said, hey, you can try and develop on top of our system. So that's a huge benefit for smaller companies because that's a gigantic user base
Right.
that now maybe they can access or at least get data on. So that's these are ways that large companies can make themselves a little bit more appealing. But yeah, it's down to it's always individual issue.
Right.
If I'm a busy founder, who do I want to spend 30 minutes with or an
Right.
hour with?
Yeah.
And if people get the sense that there's someone who only cares about like making a quick deal or quick money, maybe that relationship is hard to build. But just like with investors, when you have kind of a genuine passion for technology and for new ideas and for the difficulties of bringing that passion and creativity and putting it into a real business that people can interact with and use and improve their lives with. If you have the right passion for that, ideally it doesn't really matter if you're a corporate or a startup. That mindset is what I think brings people together.
I see.
And so if you hire someone with that mindset, you should be able to engage pretty well with a startup.
I see. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Before you joined the other tech in Asia, and what's next step?
Sure. So just for my boss, I'm very happy in Tech in Asia. Salary's fine. I love my team. But in terms of before, I've been in Japan for almost 10 years, and I started out studying. After I finished college, I took like a year to study the language a bit, and then I entered Rakuten right as they were doing their international expansion.
I see.
So I supported a little bit of that, like the post-merger, post-acquisition integration. Then I also worked a little bit on public policy, and so that's how I found TIA and started to learn more about this kind of world of startups. And I guess I found it because the same reason that I found Rakuten, I like the idea of that you have this thing, technology, which can create a new thing, a new app, a new way of living, a new way of thinking, and then how do you take that sort of very creative process, but actually make a business out of it? That's always been very fascinating to me.
Right.
And in the startup world, there's so many people trying to do that. I wanted to be more involved as well.
I see.
So I joined TIA. And for the future, probably still, I think it's a mindset thing. The world keeps changing, and so you want to be in a position where you can kind of ride that wave of change and not just watch it pass you by. And so I also think it's an international thing. It's not just what's in one country. So for the future, probably similar to what I'm doing right now, hopefully engaging with folks who have that sort of mindset and maybe have aspirations that are global as opposed to just in one market.
I see. Great. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.